I'm George Merrill. I've lived in Hampton Falls my entire life, 81 years. I now live on Depot Road, 12 Depot Road, in a house I built myself. And I have 3 children. One lives in Minneapolis. One lives here in Hampton Falls, and one lives in Salisbury. 2 sons. My daughter is in Minneapolis. And I have watched the town grow. Well, how much attention I've paid to it is another question. But I think I have a pretty good feel of what's happened with the town, and I'm not altogether happy with what has happened. It's a very desirable place to live, and that you can tell by the people who move in here. When I was a boy, there was 2 big farms in Hampton Falls here that raised vegetables like that. One with the Heel Farm, which is right across, almost across from a lumberyard on Kensington Road. And I spent many hours working in the gardens there when I was a kid with young Gene Heel, who is dead now. And he was 3 years older than me. And we were associated all my life till he died. What else?
Tell us about the other farm. And George, I'm just going to ask you not to hit the desk because that'll get picked up. Tell us about you said there were 2 farms. One was the Hill Farm, and just start your sentence with the other farm was.
The other one is the Edgerly Farm, which is Seacoast Lighting now, and that had all the fields down along Depot Road, all the way from Lafayette Road down to the railroad tracks. Railroad tracks are no longer there now, but there was a pretty active line. It was the B&M, ran from Portland to Boston. And there were, well, when I was a kid, there was probably 8 trains a day went through. And eventually it got down to where there was 1 train a day, 2 trains rather. There was one that, when they closed the depot in Hampton Falls, the people from Hampton Falls who worked in Boston used to go over to Hampton and get the train from Hampton to Boston in the morning, and then in the afternoon they'd come back to get into Hampton about 5:30, 6 o'clock. And then they discontinued the rail service, and the only thing that came through was freights. And there was one chicken farmer here in Hampton Falls who got a carload of grain once a month, all from maybe March through November. And that was the Coombs farm up against the side of Great Hill. The chicken house is still there. And my father, I, and my brother used to haul the grain for him. We'd get a carload of grain, like I say, once a month. And there was 30 ton of grain in the car. That was 600 bags of grain. We'd lug them out, load them on the truck, go up there, and then put them in his grain house, or in one end of the chicken house. And we did that, like I say, at least once a month, all summer long.
Did he sell the chickens or sell the eggs?
He raised hatching eggs and some eggs for commercial use, but mostly they were hatching eggs. He had a brooder house up there, and he sold some chicks, but mostly he sold hatching eggs. And that was Walter Coombs.
Let's talk a little bit more about the depot. Talk about the depot, what the depot was like, that area was like when you were a boy.
Well, when I was a boy, it was, like I say, fairly active. And as things wound down, Janner Lumber Company bought the freight house and used that to store cement in. And they'd get a carload of cement maybe a couple times a year, three times a year. And of course, that was perfect for them because they'd line a freight car up with it. They'd walk out, stack the cement in the freight house. And I can't tell you what year that freight house burned. Probably 1947, 48, the freight house burned. It was spontaneous combustion, I guess. Somebody touched it off and burned it down. And when the B&M ceased operation on what they call the Eastern Division, they took up the tracks. And up until recently, almost all of the rails were stacked up at the depot. And I don't know what eventually happened to the ties. But anyway, the depot, when I was young, it was probably 8 or 9 boats there at the depot all the time, dories. And people had them tied up there. Some had ropes across the river and had the boat tied up in the middle of the river, and some were yanked up on the bank. But it was pretty active, and to this day, a lot of people use that depot because it's a nice landing. When you've got at least half tide, there's plenty of water to launch a boat there. The river is pretty clear all the way down to the harbor.
Did you swim in the water as a boy?
Oh yeah.
Can you just say I swam in the water as a
Well, when I was a kid, polio was pretty prevalent then. And as soon as the water warmed up, we always used to swim down to Dodger's Pond until the water got warm. And then my mother wouldn't let me swim up there because of polio. And then from then on, we used to go down to the depot and swim in the salt water. And about 150 yards down from the depot, the river, the Hampton Falls River, which comes out of Whittier's Pond, joins the Hampton River at what we call the shipyard. And they used to build 4-masted schooners there years and years ago. And the Hampton River comes down and the Hampton Falls River runs into it. And from then on down to the harbor, it's Hampton River.
George, could you just explain a little bit about, for kids who are going to be watching this, they're not going to understand that what the thinking was about polio, can you just explain about the thought that polio was carried by fresh water, is that right?
Well, it was carried by mosquitoes, and I don't know as they really knew when I was a kid all that much about polio. But most people figured that when the water got warm, fresh water, you could probably get polio either from the mosquitoes around it or whatever, and that's why we didn't swim in the fresh water after it got warm.
Let's talk about the salt marsh itself and the haycocks and.
When this country was settled, when the people came here from overseas, that was a beautiful thing. All that open grassland. They didn't have to cut any trees or clear anything, and there was hay there to feed their cattle, and it also gave the cattle salt because they get the salt off the hay. And they drove these locust posts into the ground. They called them staddles, and they would build a haycock on top of the staddles. They'd have probably, I'm going to say 8, 9 locust posts driven into the marsh. Now those were driven and done when this country was settled. And you can pull up one of those saddles right now, and below the top of where it goes into the mud, it looks like it's brand new. And they've been preserved by the salt and the mud, so that you'd think they'd just been put in, except they're not white.
And how was the hay harvested? Can you talk about that? What you remember about that? How was the hay harvested?
Well, now I'm going by what my father told me when he was a kid. There used to be, people would go down there on the marsh with a horse-drawn mowing machine, or they'd mow by hand. And they'd mow the hay and cock it up on the staddles, where it would be above the water, and it would season there. And in the fall, the end of the growing season, they had these long poles that they'd go down and they'd shove the poles through the staddles, pick up, 2 people could carry a haycock off the marsh, and they'd carry them to where the horses' wagons were there and put the haycocks on the wagons and haul them back to their farms. And it was there were some of the people that were kind of stupid people that would drive their horses up across the railroad tracks and maybe get the mowing machine or something stuck on the tracks. The train would come and some horses would get killed.
Do you remember that?
No, I don't.
But your father does.
Yeah, when I was a kid, they weren't hay in the marsh then. It was all gone by. But when the people first came to this country to have that open space, that was the most valuable land on the coast. And everybody that got a grant of land got a portion of the marsh. And if you ever saw a map of the marsh, of the property owners, there's a piece here and a piece there and a piece here and a piece there, and it's all cut up like a jigsaw puzzle. And these were pieces of land that were given to the people that were homesteading it for their livestock.
Tell us about, talk about a little bit about your recollection of Hampton Falls during wartime.
Well, it was a kind of a different place during the war. Gas was rationed, and most of the young guys went off to war. Lincoln Ackerman lived right next to the Common. He was the first guy killed in World War II, first one from this town. And he got killed in some kind of an accident down in Pennsylvania. But most of the guys that went in the service, my brother went in the service more or less as the war ended. Now he was 9 years older than me, and he went in the service just for, he was stationed in Italy at the end of the war. He was in for about 2.5 years. He went to bomb sight school. He was going to be a bombardier, but he had bad eyesight, and that kept him from being it, and he became what they called a bomb site maintenance man. When the planes would come back, land, he'd go on the plane and take the bomb site out and do whatever had to be done to repair it, check the calibration of it and that stuff.
Were there any, aside from the gasoline rationing, were there any other things that you remember, like, lights being up?
We had ration books. We had red stamps and blue stamps. And the red stamps buy meat, butter, sugar. No, sugar was the blue stamps. But you had stamps, red stamps that you could buy meat, butter, and one other thing, I can't think what it was rationed. And the blue stamps were for other things that were rationed. Which gasoline, I think the gasoline used B stamps, and every automobile that came to the store had a sticker in the window, in the windshield. They had A stamps, that was for just private citizens for their needed gasoline, and then there were S stamps were for trucks and people who worked their vehicles like taxis and so forth, and then there was T stamps. Every car had a sticker in the windshield for what they could get. They come to the store, because I was pumping gas at the time I was 8 or 9 years old, and when they came to the store, you looked to see what they had for a ration ticket in their windshield, and that told you how much gas they could buy. Like, if they had a T stamp, they were practically unlimited. An S stamp, they could get more than an A stamp, but the A stamp was what most everybody had just for their private use, and it was pretty limited on how much gas they could buy with an A stamp. You were limited for, I don't know how long, it's so long ago, I can't tell you just whether you could buy 10 gallons a week, 5 gallons a week, or what it was, but you had to kind of keep track of it at your filling station.
Let's talk about what we had. The person we interviewed before you said she lived up on 88 near the Savages, and she said it was like that was one part of town, and she said George Merrill lived in a whole different part of town.
They were the upper enders.
Talk about that.
And they always talked about down here is the hill. And people who lived at the hill, unless they had reason to be up at the other end of town, they hardly knew the people up there. It was like two separate towns. And that was so up until probably, I'm going to say around the end of the war.
Why was that?
Who knows? People are people.
Was transportation part of that, the difficulty of?
Oh. My father, for the store, we always banked at the Exeter Banking Company. And every so often, we'd have to go up to the bank, deposit money in the bank to cover the checking account. And that always required a ride to Exeter. When I first started driving, that was always good. I could take my father's Oldsmobile, buzz up to Exeter and make the deposit, try the car out a little bit on the Exeter Road.
So let's talk about the store. Tell us about the history of the store and what you and your family. And introduce it by talking about the Merrill store.
That store was started by.
Let's start again, George, and just say the Merrill store.
I can't remember who started the store. I should be able to remember it, but I'm drawing a blank. And my grandfather lived on Indian Rock Farm. That's where my father, Marion Janvin, and Elsie Cannon, they all grew up there on Indian Rock Farm. And my grandfather, of course, did business with the store. Charlie Dodge owned the store. Grandpa came in the store there one day, and Charlie Dodge said to him, Charlie Dodge, incidentally, a little side note to that, was Charlie waited on customers, and his wife sat on a stool behind the counter and took the money, could carry it. And Grandpa came in the store one day, and Charlie said to Grandpa, you know, George, you ought to buy this store, make a good living, and be a little easier than farming. Grandpa worked for Swift and Company in Newburyport, and he used to go around all the farms in the eastern part of the country here and buy up livestock and get it shipped back to Newburyport where it would be slaughtered and then sold out of Swift and Company. My grandfather did that for, I guess my father said he did that for about 10 years. And then he bought the store. And then it was George F. Merrill store. And then my father and my uncle, Roger Merrill, went in business with my grandfather. And it was George F. Merrill and Son. Then when they bought it, it was Merrill Brothers store. And then my father bought my uncle out, and he went up to Dover and started a store. And my father kept running that store, and it became R.P. Merrill. And then R.P. Merrill and Son, which was my older brother, he took my brother in business with him when my brother got back in the service. And it became R.P. Merrill and Son. And then when my father died, then it was Merrill's, just Merrill's store. And that's the history of the store.
When did the store close? And just and start your sentence with the store closed in.
Let's see. The store closed about 1956. I think that's when it closed. And when it closed, my brother had a portion of his barn, which is down behind the heater piece there, by the brick house. He had a portion of that made into a gun shop in his barn. And he died before they ever opened it, really. It was there and could have been used, but never got going. My brother's been dead now for 10 years.
For people who are going to be looking at this and don't know where the Merrill store was, can you just explain that? What's in its place now?
It's right where the post office is.
Can you just say the Merrill store, it was right where
There was two buildings. There was a store and another building that used to set up above the store, about yay far off the ground. And that was where they sold grain. They sold grain, nails, stuff like that, hardware. There was a hardware department in the back of the store, which as a kid, that closed up. My father went through bankruptcy in 1932, the year I was born. And they closed off the back of the store, which used to be the hardware store. And of course there were drawers and boxes and stuff, and I used to go out there and paw around through those when I was a kid. That was like a treasure trove. I used to go out there. They sold everything at the store at that time before it went belly up. They sold shoes, they sold clothing, overalls, jackets, and stuff like that. All of that was sold in the back part of the store, which the store was open all the way from the front to the back. And they petitioned it off about the time I came along, and like I say, that was where I'd go out and poke around, find all this different stuff.
What was sold in the front of the store?
Groceries.
Can you just rephrase that, George? I'm sorry to keep asking you to do this, but just say that what was sold in the front of the store was groceries, and then just talk about what some of the big sellers were.
Well, meat, canned goods, sugar, all your staples. And there's a line of shelves down this side of the store, which would be the north side of the store, ran from the front of the store to the back. And then on the left-hand side was the post office. And when I was a kid, my aunt was postmistress. And then my father became postmaster. And then when he retired, my brother became postmaster. So the post office was always more or less a big part of our lives.
Were there any other stores? Was there any competition for the grocery store? Is that where people in Hampton Falls bought their?
A lot of people didn't buy their stuff in Hampton Falls. They bought their stuff at the supermarket. Supermarkets changed the whole picture of the store. Every store around was more or less a general store like ours was. Then the supermarkets came in, and of course, by virtue of buying in larger quantities, they will be able to sell at much lower prices. And they drove all of the little independent groceries out of business. Put them on hard times. Some of them survived, like Dow's store in Hampton. There was a Dow's in Northampton by the railroad station on Atlantic Avenue, and there was a Dow's store right at the corner, right across from LeMay's here in Hampton. And those two stores managed to hold out for a long time, but they finally succumbed to the progress, you might say. All progress isn't good.
Did your store sell local produce and local products?
No. Well, we used to buy some produce and stuff, fruits and stuff from local farmers. There was a man named Jim Thillow who raised strawberries up on the corner of Goodwin Road and 84. He had a farm there, and he grew peaches and he grew strawberries. And we used to buy them from him. Then we used to buy eggs, some from Walter Coons at the store. Edgerly Farms had a good vegetable stand right there where that line of stores, shops, they were across from Exeter Road, that he had a vegetable stand there, and he sold all stuff that he raised in his garden. Corn, peas, beans, so forth. He didn't get into the fruit. Before I was born, he had a little orchard, little apple orchard right down behind my father's house, the big yellow house. But that was pretty well defunct when I can remember. But he raised, Edgerly's had cows, they sold milk. But when I came along, well, they were selling milk to NEMPA, New England Milk Producers Association. And they used to, most of the farmers around here used to sell their milk to them. Brown's up on the Exeter Road, George Brown, he sold his milk. He had a dairy, he had a milk route. The farm right here had a milk route, Bachelor's Dairy, and there was let's see, there was George Brown, and he sold milk, but he sold his milk in Exeter. Forrest Brown could tell you about what they did in the milk business. And George had some fruit trees too when I was a kid, but those kind of went by the board, and eventually Applecrest bought their land and turned it into orchards.
Tell us what you used to do for fun in the winter when you were...
We all used Whittier's, down by Whittier's Pond, the hill there. We always had a ski run down the hill. We used to get down there and slide on toboggans and sleds down the hill out onto the pond. When we got snow before there was ice, that was kind of tough because you had to stop before you got out onto the pond. But we used to play hockey down there on the ice on a Sunday afternoon, almost every Sunday in the winter, Saturday or Sunday. You could by there, there'd be a hockey game going on out there in the pond. And that was used by a lot of people around here, not just people in Hampton Falls. It was a beautiful place to skate. Pond is shallow, so it would freeze early in the year, and we all used that. That was our main source of entertainment in the winter.
And what about the summer?
Well, we used to swim at Whittier's, and then up to Dodger's Pond, up beyond the chapel. We used to swim up there. Like I say, as soon as it got warm, you know, the water got warm, we transferred down to the marsh. And some days you'd go in down there at the marsh, and that water would be some cold. But of course, it had a chance to warm up if the tide was high, like say at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It had a chance, the water had a chance to warm up coming up over the flats, over the clam flats, you know, where it would heat up and it would be tolerable. In fact, sometimes it'd be almost like a bathtub.
So if you had to think about, if you had to tell a story about one of your favorite memories as a child, what would it be?
That's a hard thing to say.
Can you just hold on for 1 second?
I guess it would be, I always had an old car. I always had a Model T. From the time I was 8 years old, my brother bought me a Model T down at Seabrook, because he had a Model A when he went in the service, and more or less promised me I could have it when he got out. So when he got out, he needed a car, and the Model A was just getting a little tired. So he bought a Chevy, and he bought a Model T for me up in Kensington, a 1926 Model T coupe, which I immediately tore the roof off of and ran it up through the woods. The woods behind the store, all the way up here to Goodwood Road. There were roads through the woods. And that's where I traveled around with my Model T. And I had, I still have a Model T, which is down in my son's barn, Model T truck, which I drove back and forth to high school when I was a junior in high school. 1926 truck. It was what they called a Huckster. It had sliding doors on it and a covered body. And that was, I bought that. That came from Hampton. That sat in the garage in our barn in Hampton. And when I was going to school over there, we went to junior high school in Hampton. And we used to walk uptown from the school to get an ice cream or a soda or something at noontime. And I used to walk by this building and look in the window and see that Model T sitting there. Oh boy, I wanted that. And it belonged to a guy named Oscar Stillins. He was the parts manager at the Ford garage. Crusty old guy he was. And his granddaughter, I went to school with her there in junior high. Anyway, Oscar, I talked to him. I said, "You're going to sell that Model T?" No. Wouldn't even talk to me about it. So finally, he sold it to a kid that I was in high school with. That kid had it for like probably a month and a half, 2 months. Didn't have any place he could run it. He didn't have a license. And he sold it to me. He paid $75 for it when he bought it, and I bought it from him for $37.50. And I drove that Model T for, probably a year before I got my license up through the woods here. And I was thinking about it the other day. They used to plow the store yard, and right out almost to the corner, they'd plow the snow up, and had a great big pile of snow. One day I was out there fooling around with a Model T, and I drove it up on top of the snow pile. And it kept stuck. And it sat there on the snow pile for, I'm going to say, probably 3 weeks. And as the snow melted, the Model T would be tilted this way, and it'd be tilted that way. Finally, it got down low enough so I could get it off the snow pile.
It's a great story. Talk a little bit about going to school as a child here.
Well, I went to school up here at the East School. It was a wooden 2-room school. It was, well, about the time I went to school, they did away with the outhouse, put in 2 chemical toilets, one for the girls and one for the boys. Built like a shed roof off the side of the school. And I went there in my 3rd year of school up there. The school got a fire, and it burned part of it, and they rebuilt it and built on a little bit to it, and then it burned again. The next time it burned it flat. There was nothing left but the foundation and timbers up there. And then they built the new school. And before they built that, when it burned flat that time, I can remember it started about 8 o'clock one night, and some friends of mine from Hampton were coming back from the movies, and they were coming down the Exeter Road, and they could see the glow in the sky. And they came to our house and they said, the school's on fire. And I can remember standing there watching it burn, and there was a door in the boiler room. They had when they rebuilt the school, they had put a stoker in, and something happened, and it burned pea coal, little chunks of coal, and fed them in through a worm into the furnace. And something happened, and that didn't shut off when it was supposed to. Forced the door of the furnace open, and the burning coals were coming right out on the floor. And I can remember standing behind the school watching it burn, and there was a glass door into the boiler room, a door with a big piece of glass. And that got so hot that standing there watching it, that glass folded up like just sagged down, folded right up. It was so hot that it melted the glass in that door. And of course, we didn't have a fire department then. And we always had to wait for Hampton to get here. And the time that the school burned, quite a lot of it burned, I think that was the second fire. A guy named Lawrence Tilton from Hampton was a fireman, and he drove a fire truck. And he came over here, drove up to the school, and started a lay from the school to the pond. He got within 2 lengths of the hydrant down by the dam, Whittier's Pond, and ran out of hose. Then they had to wait for another truck to come from Hampton with more hose. And by that time, they got ahead of them and burned the school down.
Then what happened?
Well, then they rebuilt it. And that was the second fire. And the third fire burned the school right flat, and that's where we ended up with the brick school that we've got there now.
One second, I can't be coughing on the tape. Talk a little bit about the Grange.
About what?
The Grange?
Yeah, I was a member of the Grange for a while.
Excuse me, George, I have to. Sorry.
Spotting text?
Yeah, thanks. Oh my goodness. Are you okay? Would you like a Tic Tac?
Okay.
Wow, I'm sorry. Give me a second here.
The Grange was an organization that was formed, funny enough, to fight the railroads. The railroads came through. They didn't want the railroads. And the Grange, in this town anyway, formed to fight the railroad. And the railroad was the best thing for progress that they had. But for some reason, the Grange didn't want the railroad. And I joined the Grange. My grandfather was active in the Grange practically his whole life. When he would go around to these towns to buy their livestock, first thing he'd do when he got to town, he was going to be there for 2 or 3 days, was find out when the Grange meeting was. And he'd go to the Grange meetings, and all over the place, these Grange meetings. And the Grange was very big in those days. And I don't know what the different Granges were, what their aims were, but like I say, the Grange in this town fought the railroad. Didn't want the railroads coming in.
What was the Grange like when you were a young man? I assume you were a member of the Grange.
I joined the Grange when I was, 13 years old. Two of my sisters and I all joined at the same time, along with some mutual friends. My brother joined the Grange when he was, 14, 15 years old. And like I say, I joined the Grange. I was in it for, probably 8, 10 years. They were a bunch of old fogies in the Grange here. When myself and the younger people like myself who joined the Grange, we decided we'd have dances. Oh boy, you couldn't have dances at the Grange. No way. And it kind of disbobulated everything. But
Did you eventually have dances?
oh yeah, we had them.
Can you say you had dances?
Much to the dislike of some of the older members. We had people here like Grammy Batcher that lived right here. She was, what was her position in the Grange? She was I can't remember the different positions, but anyway, she was in the Grange. She was a real boss back. Everything had to be just so as far as the Grange was concerned. And nothing would ever change, but it did.
Can you just say we had dances at the Grange? Eventually we had dances at the Grange?
Yeah, we had dances. Like I say, they were objected to by a lot of the old timers. And then, of course, because we had them, some of them quit the Grange. But the Grange is an organization that was a secret organization like the Masons. Had a gatekeeper, and you had to know the password if you got there and you walked up to the door, and the gatekeeper would say, "What's the password?" And you'd whisper the password to him, and you'd get in. And they changed the password. I'm not sure whether it was every month or every 3 months. So long ago, it's pretty foggy. But anyway, like I say, there was a bunch of us joined the Grange, and we kind of changed it for a while, but pretty soon most of them got sick of trying to change things. It went back pretty much to what it was.
And what was that? What was the main purpose of the Grange?
Like I say, when the Grange formed in this town, it was to fight the railroad. As my father always told me, that was what the Grange in this town formed for, was to fight the railroad.
What haven't we talked about, George? What would you like to talk about if you were, if you wanted, young people in this town to see this video and, hear your stories? What would you like to, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to talk about?
Well, when I was a kid, this town was, you could pretty well roam anywheres. And then when people from outside, when people started selling their land for house lots, people from outside came in and got jealous of their land. In other words, it's my land, you can't come on it. That was the most profound change in the town.
So as a child, you were used to just going anywhere with no restrictions.
Yeah. We all used to get on bikes and ride down to Dodger's Pond to go swimming in the afternoon. And like I say, after we stopped swimming there, then we'd get out the depot and go swimming. But that was mainly what we did. Most of us worked on the farms in the town. I worked for Edgerly's, I worked for Heels. I worked some for Jim Thurlow, picking strawberries. And that was about it. It was a kind of a different style of life than it is today.
Marianne, is there anything that you want to ask? Or Wendy?
When I was, George, did you ever work in the Merrill store, in your dad or your brother's store?
He pumped gas, he was talking
I
about.
worked-
Okay,
I worked-
he covered, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I worked in that, excuse me, I
Look
worked
at
in
me,
that
George.
store from the time I was big enough to look over the counter.
But now you said your dad went bankrupt?
Yeah, he went bankrupt the year before I was born.
Okay,
He lost everything.
wow.
He owned the big house across the street where the lawyer is, Jensen is. He owned that house and he owned the store and the barn. No, he didn't own the barn. My aunt owned the barn. She got that from Grandpa, but my father owned the store and the house across the street. And the year before I was born, he lost everything. He went through bankruptcy, and that was caused by, there was always open credit up until this time, till about 1930. And they paid, like the store would get groceries from, they used to buy from Blake Curtis and Haverhill. They were the distributors for IGA. And you just let an account run and run and run. And each year, like when all of us lived on a farm economy, when the farmers sold their crops in the end of the year, sold their cows or whatever, they had money. They might have run an account at the store all year. When they sold their stuff, then they settled up. Then Merrill's store had money to pay to Blake Curtis. And you ran like that, open accounts. And then about 1930, they shut down on the open accounts like that. And an awful lot of places, like my father's store, had been running an account for 6 months that year. And all of a sudden, the account was due. There was no money. So that's when my father went through bankruptcy. A lot of people went through bankruptcy.
But was your father able to retain the store?
He went to there was a banker down at Portsmouth, Howland Goodwin, who my father talked to him, and he put up the money, the bank put up the money for my father to buy the store back, and also to buy the house. Like I say, that was the year before I was born. 1931, that all took place. And it was a tough time for everybody at that time, because everything had run open accounts before that. Now, all of a sudden, everything is due. And most people didn't have the money.
It was right after the Depression. It was right after the Depression, 31.
Well, things are just getting back on their feet when this happened.
George, thank you so much. This was great. I loved your story about your car. That was. I can imagine how excited you were as a kid to get that car for $37.50. Is that what you said?
Yeah, half of
half of the former purchase price.
That's right. Was your brother punky?
Yeah,
Did he ever go back to Italy after the war?
never.
Never.
No. He saw all of it he wanted to during the war.
Does your daughter like living in Minneapolis?
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
I lived there for 11 years.
Incidentally,
that's why I
my
was curious.
daughter was married to the guy who draws Superman,
Oh, really?
Dan Jurgens.
Oh.
She met him when she went out there to go to art school. And she met Dan there when she's going to art school, and then eventually they got married. And like I say, he draws Superman.
Were you one of 4 children?
5,
5, because you mentioned your brother and 2 sisters.
3 sisters.
3 sisters, okay.
I have one sister who just passed away this last year, Caroline. She was the oldest. She was named for my mother's twin sister. And then there was Marjorie, who was named, she was I think the 14th Lady Pepper. My grandparents owned the Pepperell Mansion in Kittery. And there was Marjorie Pepperell, who was, like I say, I think there was 13 of them before my sister. My sister was named for Marjorie Pepperell.
Which one was called Sissy?
But
Which one was called Sissy, George?
that's Cynthia,
Cynthia.
youngest. She died this past year. It's called her Sissy Boo.
The Merrill store was the center of town,
Yeah,
the only store in town.
That's
Everybody
right.
went to Merrill store. Did you ever tell the story about when your father, the shooting that occurred in the store? Did you ever
no, Punky shot the guy.
tell? Yeah.
Your brother shot someone?
Well, they broke in the store one night. In fact, they had broken in the time before that and stole $1,200 worth of guns. Where the post office used to be before they moved the post office into the next building. My brother turned that into a gun room and was selling guns, shotguns, rifles, and so forth. And they broke in there one night and they stole $1,200 worth of guns. So they rigged up an alarm, and by God, they broke in again, and Punky heard the alarm woke him up, and he lived in the place, like I say, down back of the heater piece there on Kensington Road. And he came up, and he hollered at the guys. The guy came out of the store and took off running out towards the Exeter Road. Punky said, "You stop or I'll shoot." And the guy didn't stop. He shot him with a shotgun, put him down, hit him in the legs. And, oh, that was quite a thing. Guy came in the store, one of the insurance men came in the store, and he says to Punky, "You know, you have insurance, but that doesn't give you the right to shoot somebody." Punky says, "By God, I'd shoot him again if he came in here."
Yeah, they gave him an awful hard time on that.
Oh, yeah.
Gave him a hard time because he shot the guy off the property. They tried to make him the
Punky says, "What was I supposed to do? Throw snowballs at him?"
Do you remember, Punky was the road agent for a while.
Yeah, he's road agent for a
A
long
long
time.
time. And you remember we used to get real bad snowstorms. And you remember the old tractor, the one that had
Down tractor.
down tractor with the great big wings on it now?
Yeah,
And he used to get a bunch of us kids, it was all mechanical, the lifts and stuff. And he used to get us kids to ride on the back of this. It was like a Caterpillar, it was an old, had treads on
what's
it.
that?
What